The mansion gleamed under the golden hues of the setting sun, its towering glass windows reflecting the sky's brilliant canvas. Inside, the grand chandelier bathed the vast marble foyer in a soft, golden glow. Everything about the estate screamed luxury wealth, power, status. And yet, in that very moment, the air was thick with tension. What happened next would leave everyone speechless. Before we dive into this shocking tale, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because trust me, this story will change the way you see people forever.
Daniel Kensington had built his empire from the ground up. A self-made millionaire, his name was synonymous with success. But what many didn't know was the woman who had helped him survive his childhood. The one person who had shown him love when the world turned its back on him. His nanny, Margaret. Margaret wasn't just a caretaker. She was his rock. When his parents were too busy building their fortune, she was the one who tucked him in at night, bandaged his scrapes, and whispered words of encouragement when the world seemed too cruel. She never asked for anything, never complained, never expected more than what she had. But now, standing in the opulent dining hall of Daniel's estate, Margaret found herself at the receiving end of a cruel humiliation. "Daniel, why is this charity case here?" Victoria's voice was laced with venom. His wife, stunning as she was, had a heart as cold as the diamond necklace wrapped around her slender neck. She flicked her perfectly manicured fingers toward Margaret, who stood quietly by the entrance, her hands clasped together, her warm brown eyes betraying a hint of sadness. Daniel's expression hardened. "Excuse me, you heard me?" Victoria scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "This is ridiculous. We live in a multimillion-dollar mansion. We host elite events. We are respected. And you bring her into our home." She let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "What will people think?" Margaret lowered her gaze. She had always known her place in society, always stayed in the background, never asked for more. But hearing the disdain in Victoria's voice stung in a way she wasn't prepared for. Daniel clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. The woman standing before him may have been his wife, but at that moment, he felt nothing but anger toward her. Margaret was family. "Victoria, Margaret isn't a charity case," he said, his voice dangerously low. "She's the reason I survived my childhood. She's the reason I even had a chance to become the man I am today." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Oh, please don't start with the sob story. You're rich now, Daniel. You don't owe her anything." Silence filled the room. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Daniel took a deep breath, his gaze locked onto his wife's cold, indifferent eyes. And then, without another word, he turned to Margaret. "Come with me," he said, offering his arm. Margaret hesitated, glancing at Victoria, who looked like she was about to explode. But then, she saw the sincerity in Daniel's eyes, the same kindness he had always shown her, even as a boy, so she nodded and followed. As Daniel led Margaret down the grand hallway, past the expensive paintings and lavish decor, a plan was already forming in his mind. A plan that would not only humble his wife but shock everyone in ways they never expected. Victoria had no idea what was coming, but soon she and the world would know exactly how much Margaret meant to him. And when that moment arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. Margaret followed Daniel through the grand hallway, her heart heavy with unspoken emotions. She had never expected anything from him, not when he was a child and certainly not now, as one of the most powerful men in the city. Yet, the way he had stood up for her just moments ago had stirred something deep inside her. Gratitude, love, a bond that time and wealth could never erase. Before we continue, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because the truth that's about to be revealed will change everything. Victoria's sharp voice echoed behind them. "Daniel, don't you dare walk away from me." But Daniel didn't stop. He led Margaret into his private study, a room she instantly recognized from years ago. It was where she had often found young Daniel curled up with his books, escaping the world of neglect his wealthy parents had built around him. He closed the door behind them, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to face her. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly. You didn't deserve any of it. Margaret shook her head, offering him a gentle smile. Daniel, dear, I've seen worse. I'm just happy to see you again. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. That's not the point. You took care of me when no one else did. You gave me love when I had nothing but money. And now, my own wife disrespects you. His voice grew tight with anger. I won't allow it. Margaret reached out, touching his arm lightly. She's just protective of your image. You've built something incredible, Daniel. Maybe she just doesn't understand what we had. Daniel's jaw clenched. No, she understands. She just doesn't care. He paused, his blue eyes darkening. And that's going to change. Margaret frowned. What do you mean? Before he could answer, the door burst open. Victoria stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her face twisted in fury. What is this, Daniel? She spat. A pity party? Do you actually believe this woman is important? Daniel straightened, his presence suddenly towering. I don't believe it, Victoria. I know it. Victoria scoffed. Oh, please. You're acting like she's your mother or something. Daniel's expression hardened. She might as well have been. The room fell silent. Victoria's smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered. So what, you're going to rewrite history now? Hand over your fortune to some old woman out of guilt. She let out a bitter laugh. Newsflash, Daniel. You can't buy back your childhood. Daniel's stare was ice cold. I'm not buying anything, he said. I'm giving credit where it's due. And then he pulled out his phone. Margaret watched, confused, as he dialed a number. Within seconds, a voice answered. James, I need you to get the legal team in my office first thing in the morning, Daniel said, his tone firm. I'm making some changes. Victoria's eyes widened. Changes? What kind of changes? Daniel hung up, his gaze never leaving hers. Margaret's name is going on the estate. The words hit the room like a bomb. Victoria's lips parted in shock. You're what? I'm giving her what she deserves, Daniel said simply. Because the truth is, this mansion, this wealth, it wouldn't exist without her. Margaret gasped. Daniel, no, I could never. But Daniel shook his head. You gave me everything when I had nothing, Margaret. It's time I return the favor. Victoria's face turned red with rage. You can't be serious. She's a nobody, Daniel. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation? Daniel's voice dropped to a dangerous level. A reputation built on disrespect and arrogance isn't worth having. Victoria clenched her fists. You're choosing her over me? Daniel's answer was immediate. I'm choosing the person who truly loved me. The room grew suffocatingly silent. Victoria's breath hitched, her entire world crumbling before her eyes. And Margaret? Tears welled in her eyes. Not for wealth, not for the estate, but for the boy she had raised. The boy who had finally grown into a man. Victoria stood frozen, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palm as she tried to process Daniel's words. The estate, the very symbol of their wealth, power, and status, was about to be shared with a woman she saw as nothing more than a relic of his past. A charity case. Her lips trembled, but not with sadness, with rage. You're making a mistake, she finally spat, her voice shaking. You're blinded by some ridiculous sense of guilt. You don't owe this woman anything, Daniel. Margaret took a small step back, feeling the heat of the moment burning between them. She never wanted to be the cause of division, never wanted to be the reason for strife in Daniel's life. Daniel, please, she whispered. I don't need anything from you. I never have. But Daniel turned to her, his eyes filled with conviction. Margaret, you gave me everything when I had nothing. I never forgot that. And I won't let anyone disrespect you. Not even my own wife. Victoria let out a sharp laugh, though it lacked any humor. You think this is about disrespect? This is about your image. Do you know what people will say when they hear that you've handed part of your fortune to a woman who was nothing more than a nanny? Daniel's expression darkened. You mean the woman who raised me when my parents didn't? The woman who made sure I had food when they left me alone for days? The woman who was more of a mother to me than my own. Victoria's face twisted with frustration. That was decades ago, Daniel. She did a job. Paid job. And now you want to reward her like she built your company with you. Daniel exhaled sharply, shaking his head in disbelief. You really don't get it, do you? His voice was quieter now, colder. This isn't about money. This is about principle. Margaret gave without expecting anything in return. She gave out of love. Something you wouldn't understand. Victoria's chest rose and fell rapidly, her anger bubbling over. Oh, so now I don't understand love? That's rich. Coming from the man who buried himself in work and treated me like a trophy to be displayed. Margaret's heart clenched. She could see the pain in both their eyes. This wasn't just about her. This was about something deeper, something fractured between them. Daniel, however, remained composed. You knew who I was when you married me, Victoria. You knew what mattered to me. And if you think wealth means more to me than the people who stood by me when I had nothing, then you never really knew me at all. Victoria scoffed, crossing her arms. And what? You think handing her a share of the estate is going to make you feel better? Like you're repaying some old debt? Daniel shook his head. This isn't about debt. It's about honor. About taking care of the people who took care of me. He turned to Margaret. You may not want it, but you deserve it. And nothing will change my mind. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. Daniel, I never needed your money. All I ever wanted was for you to be happy. His expression softened. And I want you to live the rest of your life knowing you were never just a nanny to me. You were family. Victoria let out a breathless laugh, her frustration reaching its peak. So that's it? You're just going to rewrite your will, sign over part of our estate, and expect me to sit back and watch? Daniel's gaze hardened once more. No, Victoria. I expect you to respect it. Because if you can't, then maybe you and I have a bigger problem than I thought. Silence fell over the room like a heavy weight. Victoria's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she clenched her jaw, spun on her heel, and stormed out of the room, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Daniel didn't move. His expression didn't change. He just stood there, watching the doorway where his wife had just disappeared. Margaret reached for his arm. Daniel, are you sure about this? His answer was firm. Yes. And for the first time in years, he felt at peace with his decision. But what none of them knew was that Victoria wasn't going to let this go. She had a plan. And when she put it into motion, everything would change. Victoria stormed into the master bedroom, slamming the door shut behind her. Her mind raced, her hands trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. Daniel had humiliated her. In front of that woman. In front of a nobody. She paced the room, her heart pounding in her chest. How could he throw their marriage away over some sentimental nonsense? Margaret was a relic of his past, nothing more. But now, that woman had a piece of the empire Victoria had helped him build. No, she wouldn't allow it. Reaching for her phone, she scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she needed. Attorney Graham Lewis. She hit the call button, pressing the phone to her ear. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. Victoria, what a surprise. I need a meeting, she snapped. Immediately. There was a pause. This sounds serious. It is. Her voice was sharp as a blade. Daniel is making a mistake. A very costly one. And I need to stop him. Another pause. Then, I can clear my schedule. Come to my office in an hour. Victoria didn't waste another second. An hour later, she sat across from Graham in his sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline. He steepled his fingers, studying her with mild curiosity. So tell me, what's the mistake? Victoria exhaled sharply. Daniel is trying to sign over part of our estate to his former nanny. She spat out the last two words as if they were venom on her tongue. Graham raised an eyebrow. That's unexpected. It's absurd, she corrected. That woman was hired to do a job decades ago. She's not family. She's not entitled to anything. He nodded slowly. I assume Daniel has already contacted his legal team? Yes, which means we need to move fast. She leaned forward. I want to know if there's a way to block this. Prevent him from giving her anything. Graham sighed, leaning back in his chair. If Daniel wants to gift her a portion of his assets, it's legally his right. But there are ways to complicate things. Stall. Create legal barriers that could make him reconsider. Victoria's eyes gleamed. Tell me. Graham tapped his fingers against his desk. We could argue that his decision is irrational, that he's being emotionally manipulated. If we can prove undue influence, the transfer can be blocked. Victoria smirked. Yes, that's exactly what's happening. That woman has been manipulating him, filling his head with guilt. Graham nodded. We'll need statements, proof that Margaret has influenced him in a way that clouds his judgment. Victoria's mind was already racing. Proof. She needed to make Margaret look like a gold digger, a woman who had resurfaced, preying on Daniel's childhood nostalgia to steal from him, and she knew exactly how to do it. That evening, Daniel sat in his private study, going over the documents his legal team had sent him. Everything was in motion. Soon, Margaret's name would be on the estate, ensuring that she would never have to worry about money again. A soft knock at the door made him look up. Come in. The door opened, and to his surprise, it was Victoria. She stepped inside cautiously, her expression unreadable. He sighed. If you're here to argue, I don't have the energy for it. Victoria shook her head. I don't want to argue. She walked closer, her voice softer than before. I want to talk. Daniel frowned but gestured for her to sit. She perched on the edge of the chair, looking down at her hands. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Daniel, I don't want to fight you on this. If this is something you truly want to do, I'll support it. Daniel raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. Just like that. She nodded. Just like that. He studied her, searching for deception. But she looked sincere, tired. Maybe, just maybe, she had realized how wrong she was. Victoria reached across the table, placing her hand on his. I love you, Daniel. I don't want this to come between us. He hesitated, then gave her a small nod. I appreciate that, Victoria. She smiled. Good, because I was thinking, why don't we celebrate? Daniel leaned back. Celebrate? Yes, a dinner. Just the three of us, you, me, and Margaret. A chance to start fresh. To show her there are no hard feelings. Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure Margaret would feel comfortable after the way Victoria had treated her. But maybe this was a good step forward. A chance to heal. Finally, he nodded. All right, a dinner. Victoria's smile widened. Wonderful. I'll make the arrangements. She stood, leaning down to kiss his cheek. I promise, Daniel. I'll make everything right. But as she left the room, her expression changed. Because she didn't plan on making things right. She planned on ending this. And by the time the night was over, Margaret would wish she had never come back. The night of the dinner arrived, and the estate's grand dining hall was set with the finest silverware, the soft glow of chandeliers casting a warm light over the long oak table. Victoria had spared no expense. An extravagant feast was laid out, wine glasses sparkled, and the scent of roasted lamb and fresh herbs filled the air. Margaret, dressed modestly as always, sat at one end of the table, a little uneasy. She still wasn't sure about Victoria's sudden change of heart, but for Daniel's sake, she had agreed to come. Daniel, seated between them, seemed relieved. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't caught in a battle between his wife and the woman who raised him. Maybe, just maybe, this dinner could bring peace. Victoria lifted her glass, flashing a charming smile. To fresh starts, she said, her voice smooth and warm. Daniel clinked his glass against hers, nodding. To fresh starts. Margaret hesitated before joining in, though something in her gut told her that Victoria's words were hollow. As they ate, Victoria played the perfect hostess. She laughed, asked Margaret about her past, even complimented her on how well she had raised Daniel. But then, Just as the conversation seemed light, Victoria tilted her head, feigning curiosity. So, Margaret, tell me, what made you come back after all these years? Margaret wiped her hands delicately with a napkin. I never expected anything from Daniel. I only wanted to see him again, to know he was well. Victoria hummed, swirling her wine. That's very noble of you. Then, with a small smirk, she added, You know, most people wouldn't believe that. Daniel frowned. What do you mean by that? Victoria sighed dramatically. Well, let's be honest. An elderly woman, struggling financially, suddenly reconnects with a billionaire she used to take care of. And just like that, she's being written into his will. She chuckled lightly. It just looks a little convenient, doesn't it? Margaret stiffened. Daniel's jaw clenched. Victoria, don't start. Victoria raised her hands in defense. I'm just saying what others will think. In fact, she pulled out her phone, tapping on the screen. I did a little digging. She turned the phone around, showing a bank statement. Margaret's name was at the top. The numbers were clear. A recent deposit of $250,000. Margaret's eyes widened. Where did you get that? Victoria smirked. A little friend in finance helped me. And guess what? That deposit was made 2 days after you arrived. Daniel's face darkened. Are you serious right now? You spied on her. I protected you, Victoria corrected, placing her phone down. Tell me, Margaret, if you didn't come here for money, why did someone deposit $250,000 into your account? Margaret's hands trembled, her face pale. I don't know anything about that. Daniel, despite his anger at Victoria, turned to Margaret, confused. Margaret, is this true? Margaret nodded quickly. Yes, but I swear, I have no idea where that money came from. Victoria let out a dramatic sigh. Daniel, please. She's playing you. Silence filled the room. For the first time, doubt flickered in Daniel's eyes. Victoria leaned in, pressing her advantage. This is exactly what I was trying to warn you about. She came back at the perfect time, played the perfect role, and now, she's suddenly rich. You don't find that suspicious? Margaret's heart pounded. She could feel Daniel's hesitation, his trust in her wavering. Daniel, she pleaded. You know me. I would never. Before she could finish, Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. He picked it up, and as he read the screen, his eyes widened. Then suddenly he laughed. Victoria blinked. What's so funny? Daniel looked at Margaret. His expression filled with relief. He turned the phone around for both of them to see. A text message from his personal accountant. Sir, the deposit into Margaret's account was from you. It was a transfer from one of your charitable trust funds that she was unknowingly listed as a recipient of years ago. Victoria's face drained of color. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. It was my money. He looked at Margaret, his voice soft. I must have set it up years ago and forgotten. Margaret sighed in relief, but Victoria? She looked like she had been slapped. Daniel's voice turned sharp. You plotted this, didn't you? Victoria's mouth opened, but no words came out. You had my bank records pulled, spied on Margaret,